so it's a little bit easier like that.
Okay, so
you can just for a voice balance for us, your name and your surname and your destination, please.
hi, Richard Robertson from Salvage, and I'm the general manager for the South Africa branch. Okay, so to answer your questions, we arrived here this last week, and the status was that we first had to make an assessment on board the vessel, and last week we managed to get 8 tons of fuel off it via the helicopter, taking 1 ton at a time. We then also had a plan in place to get the majority of all the fuel off, which was the low sulfur fuel, which needed heating. And that was a lot of preparations that had to go and get into place. And as you can see behind me, it's a platform support vessel, which has got all the equipment needed to actually heat the oil before it can get pumped out. While we were preparing for all of this and getting the team all organized and getting this whole site organized, the bad weather came through over the weekend, and it significantly changed the entire status of the vessel. And that obviously had to change our plans. So we're still continuing as we've already wanted to continue with. And we are making assessments right now to see how much oil is actually still remaining on board the vessel. And from that assessment, we'll update our plans accordingly and knowing how to get that oil off. And that is the biggest challenge at the moment, is to first find out where that oil is, how much there is, and can we get access to that oil and then be able to get it out. And at the moment, you can actually speak to the spill response guys that have been cleaning up the oil. So we look at how much they've actually picked up, how much we can find that's still on board the vessel, and then that's how we make our plan of how do we actually get that oil out.
Just a question. In terms of the status of the vessel at this point, can you just elaborate? What are we talking about in terms of the status of the vessel?
So you mean like the structural integrity?
Yes.
So the vessel has been significantly damaged with the storm that came through. The entire superstructure where all the accommodation is, that was ripped off by the swells. There were extremely intense swells that came through. That is ranging from 6.8 meters with a 15-second period, which is an immense amount of energy, and she clearly had the impact from that. So it took the entire accommodation off, as well as you see a big crack there, and that is where she's actually broken just ahead of frame 35. And we don't know if it's gone right the way through the vessel. There's also a number of stress fractures on the midship section of the vessel. So she's actually broken clearly in one position, and there's definitely signs of other cracks towards the midsection of the vessel. So the actual structural integrity at the moment it's not good at all. Yes.
What process is followed for salvaging? I mean, I understand that you're still busy with getting the fuel off. What happens once that process is complete?
Okay, so once we've made the full assessment, which will be happening, what's ongoing at the moment, then we update the plan to get the oil off. And so that is the absolute priority at the moment. So whatever is left on board the vessel, that is the priority to get that off. And then once that is off and the vessel is stabilized in a certain condition, then it goes into a wreck removal contract to actually remove the wreck from the beacher. And that is another whole, I can say, operation, is the wreck removal operation. But the absolute priority now is the oil, and that is what all the focus is on at the moment.
And what's the timeline that you expect to be able to complete the assessments and the treatment of the oil?
Okay, so that's
considering the upcoming.
all right. So that it's a valid question, that, but it's an extremely complex question because we are purely reliant on the weather. At this time of the year, according to all the 20-year workability statistics, you get 5% workability throughout this whole time of the month. We have had now, just to put it into perspective, in the past 10 days, we've only had one day that we've had actually really calm conditions. And this is probably the calmest day we've had today. So we are very reliant on the weather. We can make as many plans as we can, and we have to fit those plans into the weather window that we get. And that is exactly why we have the vessel off there from the original plan, was to make full advantage of the oil removal when you have that gap, because trying to have a very long enduring oil removal is not feasible at the moment, just because every week a cold front is coming through. Yeah, and you carry on. Yes.
And they mentioned that while we're standing here, that there are people working on the ship trying to retrieve the oil. I don't know if they're retrieving
Yes.
oil or completing the assessments, but what's the process when they get to sea? Are they taken to a boat? What's the process as they get to the ship?
Okay, so at the moment, which you'll probably see now, they get taken and put on board by a helicopter. Unfortunately, there are no helicopters that have operational winches here at the moment, so they actually get underslung the helicopter. So they get slung under the helicopter, and then they get put on board. We have a rope access team here from a very competent rope access technicians from RAI who are assisting our salvage team, and they are there as our safety measures. And they put up all the safety lines for our guys to get on board there, because you also need to take in consideration that it's very slippery out there. There's a lot of oil on the vessel. So what they do, and you'll see the salvors when they get off here, they all have their rope harnesses on, and then basically they've got safety lines and they move up and down on the vessel that way. And right now, as getting back to your question, is what they're doing aboard is they're making the assessment. So they are drilling holes, small holes into certain tanks to see if there is any oil in those tanks, and then if we can identify where the oil is, then we need to make a plan of how we get that oil off.
Okay, so what's the estimate at this stage? I mean, what is the estimate? I mean, from 500 tons to what?
Of oil
all
that's
remaining.
okay. So we know for sure that there's fuel oil tank. We know for sure fuel oil tank number 2 has breached totally, and that had 10 tons of oil on it. Fuel oil tank number 1 had 162 tons of heavy fuel, and that we still confirm exactly how much is left there, but the far majority of that has actually leaked out. There is also diesel oil that we've also looking in that tank that had 35 cubes, and that at the moment's also got minimal oil on it at the moment. The starboard tanks, which are all under the water, that is still very hard to determine how much is still left inside there. But I'll leave, as I said, you can get the statistics of what the team have picked up on the beach, and they'll give you all the exact amounts.
So just a point of clarity, you suggested earlier on that you're using the helicopter and not the heating pump to remove the oil, because the oil must be heated and stuff like that.
Yes.
So how do you remove it? I mean, that's like a very small helicopter. What's it like?
Yes.
10 kilograms
No,
at
no.
a time?
So,
or I don't know.
so our whole main focus on the oil removal is to use it with pumping in and pumping onto the tanks of the vessel. But that also is limited to the vessel coming in on calm days. So only when you have a small period of time where you can take some oil off, that's when you use the helicopter. And we took advantage of a very small window we had. It was too rough and we didn't have the PSV on site at that time. And that's why we took those 8 cubes off when we had the chance. Then the bad weather came through. So now, basically the prime objective would be to pump it to the PSV, but that needs a whole lot of setting up to get the heating elements. It's quite a complex operation to heat the oil. It's not as if you just put a heater in there and a few minutes later it heats up. It takes up to 48 hours to heat the oil. You circulate the oil, and then you can pump it off into a tank on the PSV. And that was the original plan.
How come Smith replaced Resolve Marine with the original Salvage on the job? On what basis was that done?
So I don't know the whole details on that. We were just requested to put in a oil removal plan, and we submitted a plan, and they liked the plan, and we were called up. I can't comment on that.
Who would comment? Is that the SAMSA thing or what? Who's the owners? Who makes that call, kind of?
That would be the owners and insurers, yes.
And just to date, it's been 10 days. There's been unpredictable weather that you guys have been having to go out and salvage the situation with. Has there been any injuries or safety hazards that the workers have befallen? Like you mentioned, it's a very slippery situation.
So thankfully, since we've been on site, there have been no injuries or lost time incidences. We have a permanent safety officer on site here that looks after all our safety. And like I said, we have a rope access technician team that are always the first to get on board there. They make an assessment, they say it's safe, and then we get the people on board. Same as before we put anyone on board, we do a flight with the helicopter around the vessel. And if we see that the waves are breaking over the vessel and assessment's made, okay, we won't get on board now, wait until either the tide changes or the weather changes, and then we get on board.
And how many salvages can be on the ship at once? And how long are they
So-
doing the assessments?
So for now, we try to keep it to 4 to 6. At the moment, we have 4 on board and constant communication with our team on shore here. Too many people, just you cannot control so many people on board. So we have a team of 4, 2 technicians, 2 salvors.
How would you characterize the difficulty of getting the oil? Firstly, the oil off here, and then the second stage, the sort of removing the wreck. I mean, is it a difficult operation, generally speaking? I mean, given the variables, especially the weather. I mean, how would you characterize that? Sort of getting that.
Just
Yes.
building on that question, if you could also reference any previous oil spills that have occurred in the past few years that, with regards to how difficult the situation is compared to previous sunlight.
Okay. On that, I think every single salvage situation is a unique situation. That you can have the same vessel running aground on the same beach, but different weather conditions, different ways it runs aground, obviously dictates how bad or how severe it is. So, yeah, getting back to on the difficulty, I would say on the difficulty scale of 1 to 10, this is probably also on the 10 scale. It's just purely at this time of the year, you're extremely bound to the weather, and I think Cape Town, or the whole Cape, didn't get the synonymous name of the Cape of Storms for nothing over the years. So that, besides the weather being the biggest complication aspect, it's as well as the ship has been broken, talking about the structural integrity. Its integrity is compromised, which obviously further complicates it. But like I said, it's challenging and complicated, but not impossible. Everything is possible. Yes. Great.
Thanks.
Just to conclude, you said that there's no. Sorry, just to conclude, you said that there's no definite timeline for when the oil removal situation operation will be concluded.
Yes. So, like I said, that assessment within the next, by hopefully the end of this weekend, we'll have a full assessment of what we're dealing with, and from there, the updated plan of what we currently have, whether the plan we have is still valid, is it still, are we still able to continue as we originally did since last week, or do we need to fully rethink how we're going to do this? And there are a number of options that we've already considered taking into just thinking, okay, this could be the scenario, what do we do? What is the worst case scenario? What is the best case scenario? So we've had all a look at that. Our team on board are trying to confirm whether it's a worst case or best case scenario. And then we just need to make the plan around that. And that's what we're busy with.
And what's the worst case scenario?
Worst case scenario is that all the tanks that are accessible have no oil in them. And all the tanks below the water are not accessible. And then we have to think about measures of how we get that oil out of the not accessible tanks. And that just complicates things. Like I said, it's not impossible. It just complicates and makes it takes a lot longer and more, I wouldn't say resources, it's more of a challenge to get that oil out. Because if it's under the water and we don't know how much oil's in there, that means putting divers in the water. And having divers, you need to have good weather conditions. The vessel is compromised. You're not going to be putting people in harm's way while the ship is breaking up. You look at different scenarios to get it out. And that's we will obviously share that once we've got the plan in hand.
So by Sunday, you'll have the full assessment done.
Sunday, Monday, yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.